Hey everybody, this is Bill Kladis, and welcome to ImbueFX. Today we're going to be talking about a highly requested set of tutorials, and that's how to use the lens flare system inside of UDK. Our goal here is to create, a pretty simple lens flare based off an anamorphic prime lens. In case you're wondering what that is, it's a type of lens that's used pretty heavily inside of Hollywood, and a lot of movies like Star Trek and Transformers utilize it pretty extensively, and it's kind of spilled its way into TV and especially into games. So every lens flare composes of a source, which is our main body right here, and then separate elements. So as I move around here, we can see these different glass elements that we've got moving, and then we've got this long streak as well. We're also going to be talking about things like distance maps. So if we keep our eye on these elements right here, as I pan back, we can see that those fade out based on distance, right? The long streak did the same thing as well. So we can adjust things like color, size, whatever we want with these. We're also going to be talking about radial distances. So if we notice here the core of our lens flare as it's towards the center of the screen, I'm positioning it roughly center here now. And as I move so that the camera pans and the lens flare gets towards the bottom, we can notice that it gets much darker. Now this is all done through the material based on screen position, and I'm clamping it so that it doesn't completely go away, but it definitely fades out considerably. We can see it as we go down here as well. The last thing we're going to talk about too is occlusion culling, and if we go underneath the world here and we kind of look at our lens flare, we get to a point where the lens flare will disappear and fade out. And that actually isn't set up automatically, so we're going to learn how to set up our bounds, and it's going to compare that based on surrounding geometry and the camera angle and determine when to fade out like we see here. So we'll do a quick breakdown here. If we go in the content browser, included with the download is a sample package. And we can see that we've got our lens flare group. We have a finished version and start version. So you can take a look at the finished version if you want to just break it down or see if there's something you can change really quickly. The main elements here are the textures. We've got the source, which is our kind of starburst shape. Going all the way to the left here, we've got our streak, which is that long streak that's going horizontally. And then we've got our lens elements, and these are supposed to represent the scattering of light inside the actual lens. So, and just to break it down a little more scientifically, every lens pretty much has multiple glass elements. It's not just one piece of glass. So when we have a lens flare, it's bouncing off and doing different things based on the shape of the iris and the different lens elements as well. So this is when we get shapes like this. So again, this is a pretty basic example. This is a pretty comprehensive tutorial, but we're not going to cover every little detail. But this will definitely get your feet going and definitely understanding the particle system a little better. We're kind of assuming that you have some basic UDK knowledge, but most importantly, you want to know how to use Cascade, at least a little bit. The two interfaces are very related, and if you find yourself getting lost trying to move around, it might be a good idea to check out some tutorials. My Cascade Complete Beginner's Guide is available for sale on 3dmotive, so you can just go to ImbueFX and use the link inside of my store to be able to download it and purchase it. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, great. So if you're going to be following along step by step with this tutorial, you want to make sure you go inside the content browser and hit this little folder to open up an external package. And included with your download is this ImbueFX Lens Flare UDK.upack. So make sure you double click on that to open it up. Then inside of the level editor itself, you want to go to open, and there's going to be a start and finish version of the map. You want to open up the start version. Now this just includes, a very, very simple level that I put together just for demonstration purposes. It's got a floor, some geometry, a light added, and then it's got the start version of this lens flare system already added for us, and we can see that right there. If I go into wireframe, just something I want to quickly note, this is the exact same icon that we're used to seeing with particle systems. So there's no easy way to look at this icon and differentiate between the two, so just be warned of that. If we go inside of the content browser, we can go into the lens flares group here, and we've got the start and finished version. The start version is the one that's placed inside of our map. So let's go ahead and double click that to open it. Now we're already looking at this and saying, hey, this looks very similar to Cascade, and it is. We have our preview window over here on the left, which we're going to be able to preview our lens flare system. We have a list of different elements. This is very similar to our list of emitters inside of Cascade. The biggest difference is that we can see this very large thumbnail window here. So we get a preview of what our material looks like. And then most importantly, we don't have any modules. This is probably the biggest difference. All of our properties are uniform. We don't add or change different things. Every element has the exact same properties, and they show up right here on the bottom. So we can see things like color, alpha, offset, etc. And then lastly, we have the curve editor, and this works exactly the same way. Probably the biggest difference to note, though, is that we don't really work with times in this case. We're working with distances, and this will make sense just here in a little bit if you hang on to that question. So let's go ahead and get started. We want to assign a material to start off with. So over here in LF Materials, we want to hit a little green, the little green icon there. And we want to go into the content browser, go into the materials group, and let's find, we've got this source streaks material. Let's find the start version of that. So with that selected in the content browser, I'm going to hit the little green arrow here, and it's going to assign that material. Really quick, before we go any further, I just want to look at this material really quick. All of these materials are set to additive, so everything we're working with are set to additive down here in material, and then we go to blend mode, it's blend additive. Other thing I want to note really quick too is that you need to have a vertex color being multiplied against your texture or all your other results before it goes into your input of emissive. And this works the exact same way, we're used to seeing this with Cascade. If we don't use this vertex color, you can enter in color values inside of the lens flare editor and you won't get any changes, right? In this case, it would just always render out as pure white. Just want to note that's really important that you keep that inside your material. So moving back to the lens flare editor, let's go ahead and change some of our attributes here. So let's start off with our color. So again, we don't add modules. We just want to go down here to the bottom and find our color section. And the distribution is already set to constant, so everything's set to pure white. Let's leave red at 1. Let's change green to blue. To 2, and then blue 4.5. A little tongue twisted there. Let's also change our size as well. So let's minimize all this stuff. And up towards the top, we can see our size attributes. Now this works just like sprites inside of Cascade. So that means that X is going to be our width. So we can change that to 310. We can see it getting wider. We can change Y, which is going to be our height. We'll also set that to 310, so this is going to be a very square particle. And then Z is irrelevant, right? Because it's a two-dimensional plane. We can change this to whatever we want. So just for organization, I always set this to 0. So let's take a look at it. Let's move this down really quick. We can see now that our lens flare system is starting to render, right? The base, the source part of it is in there. It's looking good. It's got size, it's got color, and so forth. So let's break down a quick example of some distance-based attributes. So if we minimize everything here, and go all the way to the bottom, we have this distance map scale, color, and alpha. And let's do color. So if we go ahead and maximize this window up here, what we can do is change our distribution to constant curve. And once that's done, we can add a point. And then inside this point here, I'm going to leave the in value to 0. So what this means is instead of being, we're, like we said before, we're used to seeing this in particle time. So 0 would be the beginning of the particle's life. 1 would be the end of the particle's life. In this case, this is distance to the particle or to the lens flare system inside of the world. So as the camera is 0 units away from the lens flare system, we're going to multiply the color by 1. So I'm going to set X, Y, and Z, which is red, green, and blue, to a value of 1. So this is acting like a multiplier, or kind of like color over life, to this value that we entered here, our 1, 2, and 4.5. Now what we can do is add another point. So point 1 at a distance of about, let's say, 1200, let's leave our out value for now to 0, 0, and 0. Now what's going to happen here, if we go inside the level editor, and I'll go ahead and go into game mode so this shows up better. As we're right up to the lens flare, it's rendering at the same intensity. But as I zoom back out, we can see we get to a point about here where it fades out. Right? This is all based on this curve that we're animating. Now, if you want to see this curve inside of the graph editor, you might be saying, well, since there are no modules, where is that little green button that we're used to seeing? In this case, we right-click and go to Curves, and then we can add different attributes here. In this case, we're doing our distance map color. So we can go ahead and add that, and then hit this icon right here to view fit to all. Fit view to all, excuse me. So now we can see that curve, right? We can see it starting at 1, and it's fading off to 0 at about 1200 units. So in this case, I don't want the source to ever really fade out for this example. You probably do want to have it so that, a light, 100,000 units away isn't really affecting it. But what I want to do in this case is at a distance of 0, I want to do red, green, and blue at 5. So it's really, really intense. And then at a distance of 1200, which is already established with our second point, let's just set that to 1. So what this is going to do now, if we go inside of the level editor, is that as we zoom out, we still see it from a faraway distance, right? But it's much more subtle and subdued. As we get closer in, it starts to get a little more intense. So with all that said, let's go ahead and add a new element, and let's add a little bit of a streakiness to it. So we're going to right-click here inside of the lens flare editor and do Add Element After. We'll give this a name, and we'll just call this our wide streak or our streak. Either of those work. ray distance we're going to leave to 0, and we're going to cover this in the next chapter, but in this case I want this element to be stuck with our source, right? So they move, there's no real kind of like parallax or anything like that. So let's go into the content browser and go into materials here, and I want to use this reflection 1 MIC start. So with that selected, let's go to LF materials and add a new item. And then let's assign it. And what's happening now is that this thing is so small, it's just being kind of eaten up by our source element. So let's give it some color and size. Let's actually do size first. We'll go to size. And again, X is width. So let's get this to be very wide and thin. So let's change X to 2. And then let's change Y to 0.06. And then let's go ahead and give it a little bit of color. So we'll go down here to color. Go to our constant value. Let's do another blue that's slightly more saturated, but also darker and less intense as well. So let's do 0.25 on red, 0.5 on green, and then let's do 2.25 on blue. So it's important to take a look at this inside of the editor itself. And we can see that it looks pretty good, but it's got a couple problems. Most notably, as we get far back, right, we can see that this hasn't changed in size at all. We also want this to fade out as well. So let's zoom in a little bit here. Let's get the camera panned in, and let's do those same attributes that we just did, and let's do that that distance over for our scale and our color. So let's start off with color. Let's change this again to constant curve, and let's go ahead and remove this curve and then graph this one. So we're going to right click and then do curves, add distance map color. And going back to this, let's go ahead and add a point. So if we go to our curve over here, add a point. So at distance 0, we want this to be red, green, and blue. We want it to be multiplied by 1. And then let's add another point. And at distance of 2,500 units, so we'll set our in value to 2,500. We want this to be 0, 0, 0. So we can go ahead and fit to all, and we can see our fall off curve happening here. Let's go inside the level. And as we fade off, as soon as we get far enough right around here, we can see that it fades out. That looks pretty good. I also want this to scale down considerably as well, right? So let's zoom in here. Let's do the same thing for distance map scale. So I'm going to minimize color. Let's go to scale and then change this again to constant curve. Add one more point. So at time or distance 0, I should say, we're going to do a value of 1 on X, and I actually want it to be a little fatter on Y, so that means a little taller. So let's set that to 2. Let's add another point, and same distance, 2,500 units. Let's leave this all to 0, 0, 0. So as I pan back now, we can see that this gets much wider, or less wider, excuse me, as we pan back, and then it gets wider as we zoom in. So both size and color, right, are being affected by the camera's distance to the lens flare system. So that ends this chapter. We're going to move on to the next chapter and talk about some more different elements, and we're also going to learn about that distance attribute that we haven't touched yet. I want to go ahead and start adding in some more elements that we'd expect to see off the little glass elements in a real lens, and that's also going to introduce some of our offset here with our ray distance. So that's going to give us that parallax or that counter motion based on the lens flare's system in camera space. So in the lens flare editor, let's go ahead and click on the right click on the black area here and do add element after. For name, let's do lens element near. We're going to have a near and a far, but we're starting off with a near one. We are going to touch ray distance, but let's hold on to that just for a second. Let's get a material assigned first. Let's go down here to LF materials. Let's add an item here. Go into the content browser, and I want to add this glass element, this reflection MIC start. Go ahead and assign that, and it's kind of being eaten up by this. So just for now, I'm going to temporarily disable these two emitters by checking off is enabled. So going back to the lens element near, the color looks pretty good. However, I want this to be differentiated from the next lens element that we're about to create. So even though this has color built in, let's go into color and change it. Let's do 0.4 on red, 0 on green, and leave blue to 1. So we're kind of getting this kind of lavender color happening here. For size, this is going to be really small, but I actually want to go to size and change it to even smaller, 0.15 on X and Y. Now, if we enable these other emitters again, so let's go ahead and check is enabled on. I can start giving this a little bit of an offset by using this ray distance. So right now, if I move around, let's look at it really quick inside of the level. You know, it's just being eaten up again by those different elements of the lens flare system. If I go back in here and change my ray distance, let's do a value of 0.4. So now this works in roughly 0 to 1 space. So you don't want to use big numbers. If I change this to 0.4 now, what we can see here as I move the camera around and we get the lens flare towards the fringes, we can see this element here being kind of offset. It's giving a little bit of parallax. This is what we expect from a real lens, right? So that looks really good. Now, if I move, you know, really far back, same problem exists as before. You know, this doesn't look very natural. We want this to fade out based on distance. So let's go inside of the lens flare editor. Let's find our distance map color. It's set to constant, so just like before, we want to do constant curve. And then let's add a point at distance 0. It's going to be 1, 1, and 1. And then at another point, and at distance 2,000, so 2,000 units away, we're going to fade it out. So from here we can see we get far enough, it fades in and out based on distance. That looks pretty good. I want to get another element that looks very similar but has just a slightly different ray distance and some other attributes. So we can use this as a starting point. So we can right click and do duplicate element. We'll right away change the lens element, the name to lens element far. Let's also change the ray distance to 0.6. So this is even farther. So if I look at it now, we can see now we have 2 of these that are offset based on the position of the lens flare and screen position. I want to get it to have its original colors. I also want it to be bigger as well. So let's go to color down here on the bottom. Let's just change that to 1, 1, and 1, so it's using the original values. And then let's also, for scaling, for size, we don't want to touch scaling. I want this to be bigger, but I also want it to be stretched a little bit on its width. So remember, X is width, so let's do 0.25 on X, and then just 0.2 for Y. So we can take a look at it, and now it's got a little bit different colors. It's got that different size. That's looking pretty cool, pretty dynamic. However, what we do have here is that as we pull back, we can see that these fade off at the exact same time. I think it'd be just a nice small touch that one of them fades at a little different speed, or different distance, I should say. So we'll take our lens element far. Let's go down to our distance map color here on the bottom. And instead of 2,000 units away, let's try 1,200 units. So this will actually fade off first compared to the center one. It just looks a little more dynamic like that. I think it's a nice small touch to add. So that's it for this chapter. We're going to move on to our next chapter and our final chapter where we're going to talk about radial distance and occlusion culling inside of the material. We can see that we've got really good counter motion with our different elements, and we've got different attributes that fade in and out based on distance. Now, there's 2 things that I want to address inside the material, just as kind of polished pieces. One is that we want to have this so that as the center or any element of the lens flare gets towards the edge of the screen, we want this to fade out. So if we keep our eye here on the source or the core of our lens flare, as it gets towards the fringe of the screen, this really hasn't dimmed at all, right? We can do this on any side. Its intensity stays the same. Another thing that we see that's really broken is that if we go underneath the ground and the lens flare is being occluded by the actual object itself, a lot of our elements are just rendering straight through, which is definitely not what we want. This isn't sorting properly, and this would be a serious issue if we had this, like, let's say on a pillar or something like that, where the character could walk around 360 degrees. So let's start off with the first problem of getting this to fade out on the side. So inside the content browser and the materials, remember we said that all of these elements up here on the top, the reflection elements, are instances of our parent material. So if we open up the start version of it, any changes that we do are going to be propagated down. So our material is pretty simple right now. It's just our texture sample being multiplied by a vertex color. What we want to do is search for something called a radial distance expression. So if we search for lens flare, we can see all the different lens flare expressions that we have here. And right in the middle we have radial distance. So let's go ahead and dump one of those in there. And what this is going to do is it's going to measure the lens flare's system in camera, or position in camera space, and then it's going to dim it based on that. So let's go ahead and multiply these down and let's see what it does. So let's take our texture and multiply it by the lens flare radial distance. And then that output result is going to go against our vertex color. Now we see it disappear, and that's okay. If we close down or move down our content browser material editor, it's kind of working, but it's actually working backwards. We can see as the particle system is straight in the center of screen position, it's disappearing, and as it gets towards the fringes, it's getting brighter. So to fix that, let's go into the material editor, and all we want to do is we just want to invert our radial distance data. So let's search for a 1-, and then take that 1-, or I'm sorry, our lens flare radial distance, and plug that into 1-, and that result is going to be multiplied against our flare texture. Let's compile it. And now we can see it's doing what we want. As it gets towards the edge, it dims out. Now, in my opinion, first of all, we can see that it's doing some funny things, like right there, it's starting to go into negative numbers. We don't like that. The other thing is that I do want it to fade, but I don't want it to completely disappear. I think that's kind of weird. So what we can do is inside the material is clamp it to fix both of those issues. So let's make a little room and let's search for a constant clamp. And let's take that inverted, that 1- result, plug that into our constant clamp, and now take the constant clamp and multiply that against our flare texture. So inside of the constant clamp, we have a min and max value. What I want to do is just say, hey, I don't want you to ever go below 0.3. So let's clamp that to 0.3. And now let's compile that. And now as it gets towards the edges, it's definitely dimming out, right? But we can see now that it's not getting completely black. And it's also not doing those negative number kind of funkiness that we saw before. So that looks pretty good. I like that. But if we go underneath there, we can still see that we have our other issue and the occlusion isn't working. So let's go back to the material. I'm going to pan out a little bit. And what we're looking for, if we search for lens flares again in the material expression, we're looking for this lens flare occlusion expression. Let's dump that in and let's multiply this out. And now you don't necessarily have to do this at the end like I am. We can do it before or after, but I'm just going to leave this at the very last thing so that lens flare occlusion is really the last thing to determine whether this thing's rendering or not. So let's multiply this now, our lens flare occlusion, against all of our texture sample stuff and the radial distance stuff that we've just done here. And let's compile that. You'll notice that the lens flare has disappeared, and that's okay. And the reason that's happening is because the bounds of the lens flare haven't been calculated yet. Basically they have, but they're really large. So if we go into the lens flare and open up the start version, what we need to do is right-click over here in the black area next to all of our different elements and do select lens flare. And in the properties here, we're going to have all of the kind of master properties of the entire lens flare system. So in bounds, we can see that the used fixed relative bounding box option isn't checked. And what that's going to allow us to do is enter our own numbers in. So if you use this button up here on the top that says toggle bounds, and you rotate around, you can see this blue box and this yellow sphere is pretty ginormous, right? So it's using that to calculate that expression that we used to base when to fade it off. And because it's so large, it's just fading it off immediately. Let's go ahead and check this, right? We can see now that it's at 0, so we won't even see it rendering anymore, but our lens flare has come back, which is good. Let's do for min, let's keep this small. Let's do -10 on XYZ. And for max, let's just also set that to 10. Oops. Change that to 10. We can now see our bounding box here in world coordinates. I can turn the grid on to give that a little more relevance and perspective, but we can see that it's pretty small. So if we move all of this down now, we can see that our lens flare is rendering, and that if we go underneath here, it actually starts to fade. Now, what it's doing, just so we understand the math, is it's using those bounds to compare it to surrounding geometry, and it uses that to determine the intersect that's happening here, and it's just using this curve that we're going to learn in a second to fade it in and out. So it's working almost. I want to tweak one more thing. One thing you might notice is that the lens flare is looking very, very dim. Now, one way to fix this is if we move this up, if we go out of game mode and select the lens flare, it should brighten up a little bit, as we see there. But I want this to be hugged, right up against it. So what we can do is inside of the lens flare system itself, going back to the master property, so we right-click and do select lens flare, we have this bottom option here called Occlusion, and it gives us this screen percentage map. Now, there's no way I've been able to determine to show this curve over here on the right, so we're just going to have to look at the numbers. But it's giving us a constant curve with 2 points, at 0 and at 1, and it's using this value to basically, this is what's determining the fade that's happening. So if I change this second value to 0.4, we can see not only is it brighter, let me go ahead and deselect this, But this also determines how quickly to fade this in and out. So if we change it to 0.2, that fade transition would happen even faster. So there's no one right solution. It's all really based on how big are your lens flares, how many objects do you have in your scene, how big are your objects. But those are the two sections that you want to adjust to kind of massage things to get them working right. So that's about it for this chapter and for this tutorial. So I think we've covered a pretty good grounds on how to create a particle system to get you started. I'm going to end kind of in a weird way, and I'm going to end with a warning. Don't go crazy with lens flares. It's actually really easy to go overboard with these, and it's going to look really obnoxious aesthetically, and it's also going to kind of upset your players because it can become really cumbersome to have so many of these over on the screen. You just want to be very tasteful with these. My teacher put it best in college. He said, you know, cinematographers for decades have been trying to work ways to eliminate lens flares, and then suddenly in the past 10 or so years, you know, people are just loving lens flares and using them left and right for style. So just kind of, you know, take it easy with them. I think this is a great way to add some style and flair to your level, but don't go overboard with them. So I hope this has been informative, and thanks again for joining me on here. And please keep in touch with us here on ImbueFX, because we've got lots of great new tutorials that are planned up for the future. And thank you for your time.